Well, hello there, viewer. In this episode, I will build Sincleaver from Tales of Arise.
I always love the sound of hammers banging away.
This is the blade blank after most of the forging is done. I will now go to my budget sander and will take off most of those uneven parts on the blade. I'm not sure how good that will go since I'm quite limited with space. So I will maybe have to switch to something else later. The tip turned out fine on the grinder, but I am quite uncertain with all these lumps and bumps on the blade. I will just mark them a little bit so I can remove them and get a nice straight edge. This is the first sword I have forged to this extent. I usually just order some long piece of steel and then cut out what I need. But ever since the pandemic started, my supplier, and it turned out he was the only supplier online, decided to not restock on the long stuff. So now I'm sitting here and have to figure things out. How do we do this? This thing is mostly fine. We're not going for the super precise straight lines, because I'm not a machine. There, I think that works. I have marked out this middle line, so the next step will be to grind the blade profile. So, worst case happened. The blade got too thin during grinding, and that could very well be the end of it. But thinking about the entire thing, I realized that my blank was way wider at the tip than the original, So I could cheat a little and make it thinner, more like the original, and get the thin part out that way. I have created this full-size template with the weird runes, so I can cut them out and then transfer them onto the blade, so I know exactly where I have to carve out material, so I can later inlay the golden letters. Not as clean as it could have been, but I think this will do since the design itself is rather messy and the parts that didn't come out well during the cutting out process I can still refine when actually inlaying the letters. Admittedly, I might be high on Sharpie fumes right now, but I think this looks good enough. Next step will be to carve everything out, but I think I will do that another day because it's getting pretty freezy out here. And I don't have a heat source. I originally intended to film this part on the second side when I'm about done. But after I was done with this side, because after the initial carving out with the Dremel tool I used these chisels to basically get an undercut into the letters for the rest to sit in, but I was so done after the first side that I decided to use the rotary tool on the second side to do those undercuts. The camera doesn't really pick it up. This side looks now much smoother and cleaner, but since this will be ground after the ground after the hardening process, which I'm preparing right now, I think this side might hold up even better. Now that the initial carving out of the letters is done, the next step will be to harden the blade. But since I am broke AF, I have to use basically the most traditional way of hardening you can imagine. I will make a nice little fire in here in my forge, and when it's nice and hot, I will dip it into the oil. And that is still acceptable. The problematic part is the second phase of the tampering, where you basically have to... I think the wind is ruining my audio right now. Where you basically have to have the blade around 180 degrees Celsius for around an hour. It's what the supplier said. And that might be a problem. I usually, after the fire has burned down, put all these baked stones around it. I wonder, can't probably pick that up too well. And I will measure when I'm around 200 to 220 degrees Celsius. I will put the blade in, and after about an hour I will take the blade out. And since these stones contain the heat very well, I will probably lose, I think last time it were about 40 degrees Celsius, so that is still acceptable since I'm starting a bit higher and I will be going a bit lower in the end. But I mean, the results were good enough, so that's what I'm going with for now. Nice and snug. So, this is something I myself basically never do, but I have seen a lot of respectable sword makers do it. Basically, the sword, right after the hardening, is clamped between two straight pieces of wood. Those are... Sunlight! Damn, that's bright! Those were originally the borders of the door, but doesn't matter. They're straight enough. So the idea is that the sword cannot warp as long as it is between in there. That wasn't hard, unless it was wrong. Then it was very hard. So yeah, that's the theory. I will see how that works. If it doesn't work, fuck. You can't really see much, but the blade is now in there. It has around, what was it, between 200 and 240 degrees Celsius. The blade is lying in there. I took the remaining ashes out. And now I will close it up and return in an hour, and then the blade is done. At least as far as heat treatment goes. it turns out that I kinda underestimated how much effort it would be to make these letters. This is what I started out with, what I expected to be plenty, and now I will show you what I ended with when I was done. This is all stuff that I had to acquire or make myself just to get those letters in.
Pocket sand. Yeah.
After a whole lot of grinding, I now have all the pieces I need for the handguard. Next step will be to weld all of those together. This is what it looks like after the first round of welding. I have added these little pins on those 4 parts. 3 parts, 4 pins. I added these super tiny things together, and I added those 2 back flanges. Come on, focus. Maybe it just looks that dirty. I added them together. Next up is some grinding and then some more welding.
Check out these handle grooves.
Not to toot my own horn, but the handle came out really damn well. I originally intended to use heat to get the darker color out, but the way those used sanding belts worked, I can just use it like this. I think it looks really great, the texture is really interesting, and it's basically done now. Sweet! you are still here. Then I take it you liked what you saw. Why not leave a like? That would make me happy. And if you like crazy video game sorts in general, you could also subscribe to the channel for more soon to come content. That sounded fake as balls. And if you really want to do me a solid, why not leave a comment? I'd love to hear your opinions about this stuff. Until next time. Well, have a look at that. Didn't manage to cut the newspaper, but I cut the wooden dowel clean off. The last one doesn't really want to stick since the tip of the dowel is missing. I guess that only makes it harder. Isn't that just perfect? How's that for a flex?